Stop everything you are doing right now, because what I am about to tell you in the next 20 minutes is going to fundamentally alter the way you see every single moment of your life. Not in a motivational way, not in a feel-good way, in a way that is going to shake something loose in the deepest part of your understanding of reality itself. You have probably heard of simulation theory, the idea proposed by philosophers and scientists and tech billionaires that we might all be living inside a computer program. That reality as we experience it might be nothing more than code running on some unimaginably advanced machine. Elon Musk has talked about it. Neil deGrasse Tyson has talked about it. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom built an entire mathematical argument for it. And for a lot of people, that idea is already unsettling enough. But here is what nobody is telling you. Here is what the simulation theorists are missing. Here is what the scientists and the philosophers and the tech billionaires are not saying when they sit on their podcasts and their stages and talk about the nature of reality. The simulation theory is not wrong because it is too radical. It is wrong because it is not radical enough. What you are actually living inside of is something that makes a computer simulation look like a children's toy. Something that has been described in texts that are thousands of years old. Something that mystics and prophets and saints across every culture and every century have been pointing at, in different languages, with different words, using different symbols, and almost nobody in the modern world has been willing to stop long enough to put all of those pieces together and see what they are actually describing. Until now. My name is Daniel, and 18 months ago I had an experience that I still do not have the perfect words for. I was not on any substance. I was not in any altered state. I was sitting in complete, ordinary silence in my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon when something happened to my perception of reality that lasted approximately 4 minutes and that completely dismantled everything I thought I knew about what is real, what is consciousness, what is time, and what the nature of this existence actually is. And in the months since that experience, I have done nothing but read quantum physics, ancient scripture, Gnostic texts, Buddhist philosophy, neuroscience, Kabbalah, indigenous cosmology, Sufi mysticism, theoretical physics. And what I found, the thing that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up and has not fully sat down since, is that all of these completely separate traditions, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, with no possibility of direct communication between them, are all pointing at the same thing, the same structure, the same nature of reality, the same description of what this existence actually is. And it is not a simulation. It is something else entirely. Something that once you understand it will change the way you move through every single day of your life. So stay with me, because we are going to go deep. And I promise you that by the time this video ends, you will never see your life the same way again. Let us start with what science actually knows about the nature of reality. Because most people have a picture in their minds of what the physical world is. Solid matter, atoms bumping into each other, a universe that exists independently of anyone observing it, a reality that is out there, stable and consistent, whether you are looking at it or not. And almost every single part of that picture is wrong. Not philosophically wrong, not spiritually wrong, scientifically wrong, experimentally, repeatably, peer-reviewed wrong. Let us start with the most famous experiment in the history of quantum physics, the double-slit experiment. If you have not heard of this, I want you to pay very close attention because what this experiment demonstrates is something that the greatest minds in science have been struggling to fully explain for nearly 100 years. Here is the setup. You take a beam of particles, electrons for example, and you fire them at a barrier that has 2 slits in it, with a detector screen on the other side. Now if electrons behaved like little bullets, like tiny solid objects, you would expect them to go through one slit or the other and create 2 bands on the detector screen. 2 bands. Simple. But that is not what happens. When you fire the electrons and do not observe which slit they go through, they create what is called an interference pattern on the detector screen. Dozens of bands. A pattern that can only be produced if each electron is somehow going through both slits simultaneously. As if each electron is not a particle at all, but a wave, spread out across space, passing through both slits at the same time, interfering with itself. Which should already be deeply strange. But here is where it gets truly reality-shattering. When scientists set up a detector to observe which slit each electron goes through, when they add a measuring device that can tell which slit the electron used, the interference pattern disappears. The electrons suddenly start behaving like particles again. 2 bands, exactly what you would expect from little bullets. The act of observation changes the behavior of the particle. The simple act of measuring, of a conscious system interacting with the experiment, collapses the wave of possibility into a single definite outcome. And this is not a fluke. This is not a measurement error. This has been replicated thousands of times. It holds at larger and larger scales. And what it means, what the mathematics of quantum mechanics is literally telling us, is that at the most fundamental level of physical reality, particles do not have definite properties until they are observed. They exist in a state of superposition, a cloud of probability, a wave of possibility, until a measurement interaction forces them into a single definite state. Reality, at its most basic level, is not made of things. It is made of possibilities. And something about observation, something about the interaction between a measuring system and the quantum world, is what transforms possibility into actuality. Now, most physicists will tell you that this does not mean consciousness creates reality. They will reach for interpretations of quantum mechanics that try to preserve a picture of an objective world existing independently of observers. The Copenhagen interpretation, many worlds, pilot wave theory. And these interpretations are mathematically sophisticated and intellectually serious. But here is what they all have in common. They all require you to accept something deeply strange about the nature of reality, and none of them fully resolve what physicist John Wheeler called the most important question in science. Why does the universe seem to require observers? Wheeler, who was one of the most important physicists of the 20th century, who worked with Einstein, who coined the term black hole, spent the last decades of his career arguing for what he called a participatory universe. A universe that does not exist fully formed and independent of observation, but that comes into being through the act of being observed. He called it from bit. The idea that physical reality emerges from information, from acts of observation, of measurement, of participation. And he was not alone. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, said this, and I want you to really hear these words. He said that consciousness is fundamental, that matter is derivative from consciousness, that everything we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. The man who invented quantum physics believed that consciousness was more fundamental than matter, not as a spiritual statement, as a scientific conclusion forced on him by the mathematics he himself had developed. Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, argued that consciousness was essential to quantum mechanics. John von Neumann, arguably the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, developed a rigorous mathematical proof suggesting that the collapse of the quantum wave function requires a conscious observer. And then there is something called the quantum Zeno effect, which demonstrates that a quantum system that is continuously observed essentially freezes. Its evolution stops, as if the act of watching something is literally holding it in place, as if reality responds to attention. And now we arrive at something that the physicists rarely talk about in the same breath as the quantum experiments, because it makes the picture too strange, too unsettling. It points too clearly at a conclusion that science is not yet culturally ready to embrace. But the mystics have been saying it for thousands of years. Let us talk about the nature of time, because your experience of time, the sense that the past is fixed and gone, that the present is happening now, that the future is open and undetermined, that experience is almost certainly an illusion. Not a metaphorical illusion, a literal, demonstrable, scientifically grounded illusion. Einstein showed us that time is not a constant, that it moves at different rates depending on velocity and gravity, that what we call now is not the same for everyone, that simultaneity is relative, that there is no universal present moment that all observers share. But it goes deeper than that. The equations of fundamental physics, both quantum mechanics and general relativity, are time-symmetric. They work equally well in both directions of time. There is no mathematical reason, at the fundamental level, why time should move forward rather than backward. The arrow of time, the sense that the past is fixed and the future is open, emerges from thermodynamics, from entropy, not from the fundamental laws of physics themselves. And physicist Julian Barber has argued, with serious mathematical rigor, that time does not exist at all, that what we call time is actually the brain's way of constructing a narrative from a static landscape of all possible configurations of the universe, a landscape he calls Platonia, in which every moment that has ever existed or will ever exist is equally real, equally present, equally actual. The past is not gone. The future is not unrealized. They are all equally real. What we call now is simply the perspective from which we are currently experiencing a slice of a timeless totality. And this aligns with extraordinary precision with what mystics across cultures have been saying for thousands of years, the eternal now of Christian mysticism, the concept of kairos in Greek theology, the time outside of time, the Hindu concept of Brahman as the unchanging totality in which all of time exists simultaneously, the Buddhist teaching that past, present, and future are constructions of the mind with no ultimate reality. Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, wrote in the 14th century that in eternity there is neither before nor after, that what happened 1,000 years ago and what will happen 1,000 years hence and what is happening now are all one in eternity. He was describing what Julian Barber described in the Mathematics of Physics 600 years later. Now let us add one more layer, because this is where it gets truly breathtaking. Let us talk about the nature of the self, because underlying all of this, underlying the strangeness of quantum mechanics and the illusion of time, is the deepest question of all. Who is the observer? We have established that observation seems to be fundamental to the collapse of quantum possibility into physical reality. We have established that time as we experience it is almost certainly a construction. But who is it that is doing the observing? Who is it that is experiencing the flow of time? Who is the I that wakes up every morning inside what feels like a continuous, coherent personal identity? Neuroscience has been chipping away at the solidity of the self for decades, and what it has found is deeply unsettling if you identify yourself with the content of your consciousness, your thoughts, your memories, your sense of being a person with a continuous history. The self, the sense of being a unified, continuous, coherent I, is constructed. It is assembled, moment to moment, by processes that are almost entirely unconscious. Your brain receives an enormous amount of sensory data every second and filters almost all of it out, constructing a simplified model of reality that is useful for navigation and survival. The colors you see are not in the world. They are computed by your visual cortex. The solidity of objects is an inference. At the atomic level, the chair you are sitting on is almost entirely empty space. The sense that your decisions are freely made is, neuroscience suggests, largely retrospective. The brain initiates action before conscious awareness of the decision to act. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the memories that constitute your personal history, the narrative that makes you feel like the same person who existed yesterday and last year and 10 years ago, those memories are not recordings. They are reconstructions. Every time you remember something, you are not playing back a stored file. You are rebuilding the memory from fragments, and in the process of rebuilding it, you alter it. Your personal history is a story you are continuously rewriting. The self you think you are is a story. A useful, functional, elaborately detailed story, but a story nonetheless. And now here is where everything we have talked about converges into something that I think is the most important idea you will encounter in this video. If physical reality emerges from observation, and the observer is not the solid, continuous self it appears to be, and time is a construction rather than an external absolute, then what is actually happening here? What is this experience? What are you? The answer that the mystics give, the answer that I believe the physics is beginning to point toward, is this. You are not a person having a spiritual experience. You are consciousness itself having a human experience. You are not a small, separate, isolated self moving through an objective physical world. You are an expression of an infinite awareness that is dreaming this entire reality into existence, including the character you think you are. The Upanishads, written approximately 3,000 years ago, state it with a directness that is almost shocking. Tat tvamasi, that thou art. You are that. Not you are connected to the infinite. Not you are a part of the infinite. You are that. Brahman, the ultimate reality, the ground of being, the consciousness that underlies everything, is what you fundamentally are. The individual self, the Atman, is not separate from Brahman. The appearance of separation is what the Upanishads call Maya, usually translated as illusion, but more precisely translated as the creative power that makes the one appear as many. And the Christian mystics say it differently but mean the same thing. Meister Eckhart again, The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye is one eye and one sight and one knowing and one love, not a metaphor, a description of the deepest nature of what is actually happening. The Sufi poet Rumi, "There is a field beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing. I will meet you there." The field he is pointing to is the field of pure awareness that underlies all experience, in which the apparent opposites of the world of form dissolve. The Zen tradition points at it with its koans, the paradoxical questions designed to short-circuit the rational mind and provoke a direct encounter with what you are beneath the story of what you are. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your face before your parents were born? The questions are not meant to be answered. They are meant to stop the mind long enough for something else to be recognized. And indigenous traditions across the world, traditions with no contact with each other, no shared language, no common philosophical lineage, describe the same understanding. The Lakota concept of mitakuye oyasin, all are related. Not all are connected, all are the same thing expressing itself in different forms. The Aboriginal Australian concept of the dreaming, the timeless ground of reality from which all of manifest existence continuously emerges. The Amazonian shamanic traditions that describe individual consciousness as a local eddy in an infinite ocean of awareness. Different words, different symbols, different cultural containers, the same recognition. And now here's the part that I want you to sit with for a moment, because this is not just a philosophical curiosity. This is not just an interesting idea to think about and then set aside and go back to your ordinary life. If this is true, if consciousness is fundamental, if the self is a construction, if time is a creation of the mind, if what you actually are is not a small separate creature moving through an indifferent universe, but an expression of the infinite awareness that is generating this entire reality, then everything changes. The suffering changes. Because if you are not ultimately the character in the story, but the awareness in which the story is appearing, then the suffering of the character, as real as it is, as painful as it is not the final truth about what you are. The fear changes. Because the thing you are most afraid of, the end of the self, death, is not the end of what you fundamentally are. It is the end of a character in a story, and the awareness that generated the character does not end. It has never begun. It cannot end. The sense of meaninglessness changes. Because if you are a separate creature in an indifferent universe, meaning is something you have to manufacture, something you impose on a reality that has none inherently. But if consciousness is fundamental, if the universe is not indifferent but is in some deep sense aware, then meaning is not manufactured. It is discovered. It was always there. The relationships change. Because if you and the person in front of you are both expressions of the same infinite awareness, temporarily experiencing itself as two separate people, then the love between you is not just a neurochemical transaction between two isolated biological organisms. It is the infinite recognizing itself in a mirror. It is the one experiencing the joy of appearing to itself as two. The suffering of others changes. Because if the homeless person on the street and the child dying of disease in a country you will never visit are not fundamentally other, if they are at the deepest level the same awareness that is looking out of your eyes right now, then compassion is not a virtue you choose to practice. It is the natural response of consciousness recognizing itself. Now I want to address the obvious objection, because I know what some of you are thinking. This is all very poetic and very beautiful, but what do you do with it? If I am infinite consciousness having a human experience, I still have bills to pay. I still have a body that gets sick. I still have relationships that hurt me. I still have a life that feels very much like a small, separate, vulnerable life. And to that I want to say two things. The first is this. The recognition of what you fundamentally are does not make the human experience disappear. It does not dissolve the pain or the bills or the difficulty. What it does is change the relationship to those things. When you know, not as a concept but as a lived recognition, that you are not ultimately the character who is suffering but the awareness in which the suffering is appearing, the suffering does not disappear, but it loses the quality of ultimate threat. It becomes something happening in you rather than something happening to you. And that shift, from something happening to me to something happening in me, is one of the most significant shifts in the quality of human experience that is possible. The second thing I want to say is this. The recognition of what you are does not require you to have had a mystical experience. It does not require you to spend 40 years in meditation. It does not require a lightning bolt from the sky. It requires something much simpler and much harder. It requires you to stop, right now, in the middle of whatever your life looks like, and ask, who is aware of this? Not what am I thinking, not what am I feeling, not what is happening to me, but who is aware? And in that question, in the genuine, sincere turning of attention back toward itself, there is the possibility of recognizing something that has been here all along, something that was never absent, something that every noise of the ordinary mind has been drowning out, the awareness itself, silent, spacious, untroubled, the eye that sees but cannot be seen, the knowing that knows all experience but is not itself an experience. That is what you are, not the thoughts, not the feelings, not the story, not the character, the awareness in which all of it appears. And once you glimpse that, once you have even a single moment of genuine recognition of what you actually are, nothing looks the same again. Not the suffering, not the joy, not the ordinary moments of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. All of it becomes extraordinary. All of it becomes sacred. All of it becomes the infinite playing at being finite, the one playing at being many, the eternal playing at being temporary. And you, the real you, the you that was never born and will never die, you are the one playing. You always have been. The game is more beautiful than you imagined, and you are more than you have ever been told. Wake up. You are not in a simulation. You are the one dreaming it.